Looks like we've got people connecting, so I think we can get started. Welcome to the FinDev Gateway and European Microfinance Platform, e-MFP webinar, Paths and Potholes Ahead, Findings and Themes in the e-MFP Financial Inclusion Compass 2024. My name is Abby Augusta. I'm an editor for FinDev Gateway, and I'm joined by my colleague, Virginia Brown, who is supporting us on the technical side for this Zoom webinar. She's available in the chat if you have any audio or connection issues that she can help with. Our series of FinDev webinars allow financial inclusion practitioners like you to share lessons and attend online presentations and discussions delivered by the world's leading financial inclusion experts. Before we get started, I just wanted to share a couple of notes on logistics. All attendees will have their microphones muted automatically. And to ask questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A function, which should be available from the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window. We invite you to submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar, and we'll address them in the Q&A session at the end. We also ask you to keep your webcam off to ensure your privacy and avoid bandwidth issues. And finally, the webinar recording and presentation will be available on the FinDev Gateway website after the webinar is finished, and we'll also email the webinar recording to all the participants. And now I will hand things over to Sam Mendelson from the European Microfinance Platform to introduce today's webinar and our speakers.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much, Abby, and to the FinDev team for having this joint webinar with us. We're extremely pleased. I'm extremely grateful as well to the three respondents who you're going to meet later, the panelists who were all respondents to the Compass survey this year: Asongo Abraham from Standard Microfinance Nigeria, Deborah Foy from Opportunity International App, and Philippe Guichandut from Grameen Credit Agricole Foundation. This webinar is the launch of the Compass. My colleague Daniel is going to post the link towards the end of the webinar in the chat. You could download the paper there. Also, the Spanish and French versions of the executive summary will be available there. So the agenda for today is I'm going to give a very brief background to the series of publications that has led up to this one. Some of you may be very familiar, some not at all. A little summary of the methodology and respondents of this particular survey. The first part of the survey is on current trends and rankings. The second is future priority areas. The third was a new question this year on perceived weaknesses in client protection, and we're going to do a poll on that. And then there are two open-ended questions in the survey itself, which are on what does microfinance or financial inclusion mean, and what have been some missed opportunities. I'm going to present some high-level themes from that. And then you're going to hear from my three co-panelists today. They received the paper a couple of weeks ago. They've had a chance to respond and think, and they're going to talk about what they found interesting or surprising, or what they'd like to see in future editions. And then please do put questions in the Q&A. Daniel will answer some of them by writing if they're ones on the survey itself, but please do as well. If you have a question for either for me or any of the other three, please try and make it as specific and focused as possible, and we'll get to them towards the end. So there's a little delay as here we are. Okay. So this is the 7th, as I said. You can see the covers back there. It goes back to 2018, and the idea, it was conceived as an opportunity, something we thought was missing, which is an opportunity to really sort of gauge perspectives in one place from different stakeholder groups on what is the current trends and where are the future challenges and opportunities in the sector. Some of the discussion that we would we would see happening in the sessions and on the fringes of European Microfinance Week each year was a real impetus for this. And so what came out of it is a mixed methodology survey where respondents see lists of trends and future priority areas and are asked to score them or rank them and provide comments. And then there are some open-ended questions towards the end, which are optional. The survey is in 3 languages. This year it was open in April to May. And importantly, attribution is optional. So respondents can choose whether or not they want their comments anonymized or not. There were 149 responses to the survey this year, which is almost a record, and 63 from 63 countries, which is a record. This gives you a sense of where they come from. As you can see, as always, some strong representation from Western Europe, lots from Sub-Saharan Africa, a greater representation this year than in the past, and plenty around Latin America and the Caribbean, and some from South Asia as well. Let's look a little breakdown of, we asked respondents a couple of questions at the start. One is, where is the primary geographical focus of their work? And hopefully you can see this on the screen. Zoom does blur it slightly, but what the important part is here, Sub-Saharan Africa is this year the largest proportion with 27%, that's the plurality, with smaller representations from Latin America, South Asia, and the like. We ask respondents as well for their main organization or role. So at the high level, that would be financial services provider, consultant, funder, researcher, or infrastructure organization. And then there are subcategories as well. You can see here that a plurality, FSPs, this is the highest proportion we've ever had, and which we're pleased by. We always wanted to make sure that FSPs' voices are very loudly heard. And that really does have implications on some of the findings this year as well. Infrastructure organizations is not a term that is widely used. It's used here as a catch-all that really covers networks, associations. So MFC or CFI or e-MFP would be, or national networks would be examples of infrastructure organizations. So FSPs are now 38%, and there are slightly fewer consultants and support service providers and more DFIs as a share of funders. So the first part, probably the most important part of the survey, is what we call the trends rankings. Each year, the list of trends that's presented varies slightly, but they always are 20, and respondents are asked to score them 0 to 10 in terms of their current importance in the sector and add comments. So this is this year's list. The ranking on the left, the list of the trends, their average score, and last year's rank on the right side column. A few takeaways here. Climate change adaptation and mitigation has continued to rise over several years and is now top. It was 8th in 2022, 2nd last year. Client protection and client resilience to shocks retain their spots in the top 4. In fact, the top 5 for overall respondents has not changed much. Innovation in product development has moved up a bit, but otherwise there's not much movement in the trends, with one exception of new financing instruments, which changes in part because we tweaked the name. If you have any questions on methodology, we can talk about them later, but I won't go into that too much. The last point is that AI, which is in 20th spot, despite being unbundled from different other new technologies like blockchain to see if there was interest, is a very solid 20th percent as well. It is for respondents by far the least important trend. And it does beg the question, is this actually a bit of a damp squib of a topic, as we put in the paper, or is the sector an outlier in failing to adequately perceive what the real opportunities and changes, positive and adverse, negative, are to come? The big takeaway of this year's survey is that FSPs really are very different than other groups. We saw this over the last couple of years. In fact, there was a postscript to last year's paper on this very topic, and this really has become more and more prevalent. They rank climate change and adaptation 13th, even though it's first overall. FSPs rank client protection 9th, compared to non-FSPs, who rank it second. They rank clients' resilience to shock 6th versus 3rd for others. But by contrast, innovation in product development is top for FSPs, but only 9th for everyone else. And fraud against customers was such a huge divergence here. It actually gets a little box of its own in the paper. And for those reading the paper, I hope you find it interesting. This was a new trend. It's the first time we've put it this way, and it's ranked second by financial service providers compared to 13 for everyone else. Researchers put it fourth, but for everyone else, it's very low. Deborah is, I think, going to touch on this a little bit later as well, and to give her perspective as head of a network on where the real challenges in fraud against customers are. And here are just some examples of quotes on gender, because, excuse me, because gender mainstreaming within financial inclusion organizations has also very big intergroup variance. FSPs, funders, and infrastructure organizations, second, third, and fourth, consultants and researchers, bottom. So that was a lot of spoken data. Let's do a little poll now for the next section. So part 2 of the survey asks, and based on the feedback that we received over the years and the end of the SMART campaign and Ceres SBTF's role as custodians of client protection standards, we thought we'd ask respondents where they see the biggest weaknesses in client protection today. So you're about to see here we are, a list of the 8 standards. I think it's already gone up on the screen. Please choose, if you could, 3 areas of client protection where you see the biggest weaknesses. In other words, where you think the highest priority should be given to meeting these weaknesses from the sector. There should be a list of 8 in front of you, and please choose 3, not more than 3, and ideally not less. I'll give you 30 seconds or so. Let's take another 15 seconds. We're mostly 75%. Most of you have participated. Okay, I think we've got a sufficiently high percentage. Would you mind ending the poll, please, Virginia? And let's share the results. Okay, so let's look at this. Hopefully you can all see the results. Prevention of over-indebtedness is the highest. Appropriate product design and delivery is second. Equal second with responsible pricing. Responsible pricing is second, and then appropriate product design and delivery is second. Let's see how this compares with the results in the compass itself. Right, here we are. Very similar. You can see the top 3 here. These, don't worry too much about the numbers. The scores are converted to a 0 to 100 index. But what it shows here is that prevention of over-indebtedness, responsible pricing, and appropriate product design and delivery are the top 3, exactly as you all chose, although the gap was smaller between second and third, which shows that we have a fairly representative sample here today. A clear 3 emerges across the top groups. What about if we look at rankings between respondent groups? These are just rankings, not scores, but what you can see here is that FSPs really rank appropriate product design and delivery as the biggest weakness. This is understandable. They are the ones that benefit most from this standard and bear the consequences when it's absent. They put privacy of client data above responsible pricing, which they see as a low weakness. Responsible pricing is clearly perceived as a less significant weakness for FSPs than other groups. So this would be in the top position, but for the large sample of FSP this year. Funders, by contrast, are concerned about responsible pricing and prevention of over-indebtedness. And consultants and support service providers put a strong premium on transparency. If you'd like to get into this in more depth, of course, it does so in the paper. I'm just skimming over this now, but again, to show that different groups really respond differently to where they see the weaknesses in the sector. Future priority areas are going to go through very quickly. This is the second major part of the paper. And here respondents are asked to look into the future and be subjective, like where would they like resources to be diverted or committed in a 5 to 10 year time frame. What do we see here? The rankings have not changed very much, in fact, very little year to year, but again, big differences between respondent groups. FSPs put green finance. So FSPs are red here on the x-axis. You can see the different respondent groups and then the index score on the right. So FSPs put green and climate smart finance much lower than other groups. This is not an aberration. This is a consistent trend that shows up however we ask the question on this topic. Oh, excuse me. Infrastructure organizations, by contrast, give it a very high score. FSPs do care about agri-finance very high, as you can see on the far left. And I think Asongo is going to talk about this a bit later. And they rate food security much higher than other groups, except for researchers. Infrastructure organizations, by contrast, give no score at all to FSPs. Finally, refugees and forcibly displaced people is rated much higher by funders and infrastructure organizations than other groups. One interpretation of this is because they tend to be more macro in their perspective, whereas for FSPs, they will be replying more at the specific context in which they operate and which may not be subject to forced displacement. And finally, this just shows differences in the index scores by FSPs versus non-FSPs. I'll go over this quickly now because anyone who's interested in this side of the survey can look into the paper. So there are two open-ended questions at the end. And in many ways, I think this is the richest part of the Compass series, because there's no equivalent survey that does give people the opportunity with no word limit to answer questions however they want, either anonymously or attributed. And the questions have varied over the years. We've asked variously about future avenues of research, the impact and legacy of the pandemic, challenges, opportunities. There was even one question one year where we asked, if you had a magic wand, what would you like to do? This year we asked two. One was on where do you see the biggest missed opportunities? Where has been the biggest missed opportunity in financial inclusion, or what should the sector have done and how do we avoid such missed opportunities in the future? There were 7 or 8 themes that came out of this, and I'm going to just introduce them at the highest level. I encourage you to read them in depth because this generated over 10,000 words of contributions, this question. One is on a failure to adequately develop tailor-made products and focus too much on top-down pressure, only paying lip service to genuine client centricity, particularly when it comes to the last mile. And underinvestment in research or impetus on non-financial capacity building services, although I think most respondents believe that progress has been made in this area. And a continued primacy of credit as the default product, particularly at the expense of savings and insurance. There is too often still a conflation of access with usage, although this has been a positive trend, but too much focus on rollout, on penetration of accounts over whether they're actually used and if they are actually valuable to beneficiaries. This related is there's been a missed opportunity, respondents believe, to think about impact much more broadly than they do in the past in terms of this very access-focused approach. And secondly, there has been not only pursuing the low-hanging fruit of credit, but also in which segments are served, and a underserving of young people, smallholders, forcibly displaced people, and women. And a lack of, on that last point, a lack of intentionality in gender mainstreaming. Finally, on this question, digital finance developed or generated the most responses, and there's probably the strongest in their tone as well. A lot of respondents said there has been, despite all the hype and the advances, there's been the sector has been too slow to embrace the full potential of different technologies, particularly those that are client-facing and that are tailored to the needs of the unbanked with low literacy and numeracy. Sorry, it's just laggy. But they say that this is a complex issue. On the one hand, there is this need to invest and hype new products to nudge people towards uptaking them, but also recognizing that there are infrastructure problems in many markets and a lack of trust or confidence that among these clients, which means that they still resort to dangerous alternatives. And their solution to this is more comprehensive financial integration integrated with digital financial services. The final question, and it's a very hard one to present here because it's a very different question than has ever been asked before. It was deliberately designed to be a little bit provocative, a little bit cynical. And the background to this will be familiar to a lot of people on this call. How often are you asked by a friend or someone outside of the sector, what do you do? And you find yourself floundering over terminology because they maybe know what microcredit is or microfinance, but they will, if they do know anything, they probably still think of it about small credit in South Asia to microenterprise women that will drag them out of poverty and in reality often pushes them into cycles of debt and misery. But if you say financial inclusion, very few people understand this. And like e-MFP, we more commonly use financial inclusion than microfinance now. This paper is called the Financial Inclusion Compass. FinDev used to be the microfinance gateway. So this idea will not be new to anyone on this call, but what does it actually mean? Is the difference meaningful, was the question we asked. It generated a huge response that I really can't adequately summarize here, but trying to move forward here. Apologies, it seems to be frozen. Abby, can you jump forward a couple of slides, please? The point is, thanks, just keep going. For many, it can be used interchangeably, but shouldn't be. A lot of people defined it, thanks, by either the products that it serves or the beneficiaries of those products, the segments. Some respondents said the difference is really in the objectives, in how they affect which term is more commonly used. Could you push through, please? Keep going. But thank you. But the point was made that it's not always unidirectional. It's not just that we used to use microfinance and now financial inclusion is the only term that should be used. There is a scope for both, and that they are actually very complementary terms. And then if let's just scroll through to the last slide here. For some, they are interchangeable, and you can see some examples of the quotes from the paper on the right. For others, they say it shouldn't be. And then finally, there was the rare dissenter who accepted the cynical premise of the question and said that this is in fact nothing more than an empty rebrand, and effectively it's marketing bump. So on that thought, I'm going to hand over first. I'd like Asongo, Deborah, and Philippe to put their cameras on if you don't mind, and then we can stop sharing the screen. Abby, and I'm going to hand over to Asongo first, who, as I said, is COO of Standard Microfinance Bank in Nigeria. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, please, on what you found interesting and what you found surprising in particular from the paper. Thanks.
Thank you, Sam, and good afternoon, everyone joining us on the webinar today. I appreciate e-MFP for organizing this and giving me the privilege to be part of the people that are going to make comments. I've gone through the survey, and also thank you for that wonderful presentation. The analysis and the clarity of results make things very easy for us. The first thing I would like to mention on the survey is on the compass trend, where we talk about the green energy and climate smart finance. I'm a bit surprised because if you look at the results vis-a-vis every group that responded, why consultants, funders, researchers, infrastructure organizations consider green energy and climate smart a top priority, financial service providers view it differently. And I would like to say that it's not because financial service providers are unaware of the menace of climate change globally, but there are bottlenecks, which I would like to mention. First, if you look at financing climate smart projects, it's a kind of higher cost because it requires higher upfront costs for both the institution and the borrower. And most of the times, financial service providers, microfinance institutions, their loans are short-term. So when you look at high-cost projects, short-term loans, there is a mismatch. And it may be the reason why microfinance institutions are not willing to really go into that sector and comparatively rated it lower than other sectors. The second thing on that point is look at the limited capital base of most of the financial service providers. They may not want to go into funding projects that are of high cost. And it's very good that we have funders and institutions that give funding to financial service providers on this webinar. And I want to advocate that if there is going to be a change for financial service providers to focus on climate smart financing, there should be funds channels for that purpose, which we like pushing the effect and make them to give these loans on concessionary rates. And I believe when that happens, going forward, the data will change. And then the last thing is the implementation challenge. When you look at the implementing climate smart projects, it often requires specialized knowledge and technology, which may not be readily available in some regions. And that may be the reason. The second point I would like to comment on is the biggest weakness in climate protection. And we just run a poll now, and it tallies with what the survey already said. But I'm a bit surprised because prevention of indebtedness and responsible pricing are rated above appropriate product design. That's why I'm a bit surprised. The reason being that appropriate product design and delivery takes into account all other clients' protection principles, because these principles are interrelated and collectively they contribute to a holistic approach to ensuring customer welfare. So lack of appropriate product design affect the rest. And that is why financial institutions, they rated appropriate product design as the biggest weakness. Take, for example, by designing products that fit the financial capabilities and the need of the customer, financial service providers prevent clients from taking more debt than they can handle. Number two, when you talk of responsible pricing, you see appropriate product design involves setting fair and reasonable interest rates and fees, ensuring that customers are not exploited. When you talk about transparency, communication of the features of the product, it covers all aspects. Therefore, if we miss it in the appropriate product design, the rest of the client principles are affected. And that's why financial service provider rated that as the highest. Now, I come to the last point, which I want to comment. Future priorities areas in financial inclusion. I'm not surprised that financial service providers rated agri-finance much higher than other sectors. The reason is this. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, the first goal talk about poverty reduction. Financing agriculture is a sure way of ending poverty. because agriculture is one of the major income sources for millions of people worldwide. So financial service providers choose this because it's most preferred. This is the sector that when you channel the resources there, you are touching the lives of the last person in that remote community. Number two, when you talk about food security, which is goal number 2 of SDG Zero Hunger, supporting agriculture enhances a food production and availability, contributing to food security and combating hunger. So I'm not surprised that financial service providers are advocating that more resources to be channeled to agri sector. And when you talk about women empowerment, financing agriculture take care of women empowerment because many agricultural activities in some countries are handled by women, providing financial support to female farmers, promoting gender equality, and enhances household welfare. So again, this take care of the women empowerment aspect. And then the last point, which I want to talk about, is financing agriculture promote sustainable practices. MFIs can promote the adoption of sustainable agriculture practices that mitigate climate change impact, such as agroforestry, organic farming, water efficient techniques. All these put together is the reason why financial service providers are rating agri sector as one key sector that resources should be channeled so that the benefit goes to the last mile, the last person in the rural community, which is the essence of microfinance institutions. So thank you very much. Hand it over back to Sam.
Thank you. That is very interesting. And there are a couple of follow-up points I'd like to ask before handing over to Deborah next. Is I know that you have some thoughts on artificial intelligence, on why it remains so low. Could you expand briefly on them as well? And the other point was fraud against customers, as the box in the paper outlines. FSPs are very concerned about this. And I suspect this is probably a case where it's not that there's one side seeing panicking or perceiving too much risk, and the other side, it's a question of knowledge that outside the funders, consultants, infrastructure organizations don't fully understand the severity or how widespread fraud against customers really is. And of course, it's related to client protection. It's related to digital financial services anyway. Could you expand on either of those 2 points briefly?
Thank you, Sam. The first point is the artificial intelligence. You know, when we look at the survey, it was rated last. You know, microfinance institutions often do not prioritize the integration of artificial intelligence into their operations because there are reasons. One, lack of awareness and understanding. You agree with me that yes, up to now, there's knowledge gap. There's lack of awareness and understanding of AI technologies and how they can be applied to financial service providers' operations. And then the second point, why financial service providers may look at that as not a priority at this time, maybe cost and resources constraint. There is higher initial investment because implementing AI technologies often require a significant upfront investment in software, in hardware, skilled personnel, and then ongoing cost of maintenance and updates. So this may be the reason why FSP may not want to go into that at this moment. Then you talk about technical and infrastructure challenges, limited IT infrastructure, data availability and quality,
right?
And all that. Then the last point is you mentioned about again customers. You know, customer, just like we read in books, is the first person. Without customer, no business. If there is fraud in customer's account, that customer can spread that news to many, and you will discover that your business is actually at stake. So right now, financial service providers are going extra mile, getting systems that can protect phishing, scams, and all those online fraud against customers, because protecting your customer is a key. It guarantees your sustainability in business. It guarantees the satisfaction of the customer. And that is the reason why, if you look at the survey, financial service providers rated this higher above other sectors.
Well, I think that's a great opportunity to hand over to welcome Deborah now. because I know she has some thoughts on both of these. So welcome, and could you say what you found interesting or surprising in the paper? Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sam. I have to say I've really enjoyed digging into the results of the survey. Let me perhaps build on Asongo's insightful comments then with my own perspective, which of course comes from a very different vantage point. I think reading in the report, looking at the current trends, perhaps what was most interesting for me was that while the, if you like, the explosion of digital services evidently continues to be a real source of optimism for the sector, it's clearly causing concern for FSPs, and that's largely, I think, because of fraud. And across Opportunity International, we have seen definitely a significant uptick in fraud over the last probably 12 to 18 months in countries like Ghana, in Uganda. We're seeing, I think, that the bigger banks have invested in solutions to protect their digital channels, and that's, I think, really driving criminals to these smaller institutions who don't yet have adequate security systems in place. And I think presumably that's following a very similar trend that we saw a few years ago with money laundering. So I think, yeah, in many ways, not surprising to see FSPs rank fraud so highly because of money lost, because it affects their reputation, just like Asongo said. But I do think it's a shame, really, that the sort of the broader financial inclusion sector didn't rate it as such a priority. I think it's 13th on the list because it does have huge potential ramifications. Yeah, we know that fraud erodes trust in financial services. We know it decreases confidence in the sector. And we also know that it affects the most vulnerable, and particularly women. So, yeah, thank you, Asongo. Thanks to those FSPs that responded to the survey for bringing it to our collective attention. I think fraud really needs to be a big issue for all of us here, given that it creates new modes, I think, of financial exclusion. And for organisations like Opportunity, it really is a reminder that we need to do more, I think, to make sure areas such as cybersecurity measures go really, I guess, hand in hand with digitisation and are not just introduced as an afterthought, which I think happens quite a lot. Secondly, I wanted to comment very briefly on artificial intelligence. So thanks, Asongo, for your perspective. I think for me, it did come as a surprise to see it ranked right at the bottom of the list. There are question marks, of course, about the limits of its capabilities. And as Asongo, you rightly pointed out, issues around cost, issues around knowledge. But I think there are some potentially really exciting ways that AI could have an impact or should be having an impact on financial inclusion. And we've just started actually a trial in Malawi using generative AI with smallholder farmers that's showing some really, really good results. I think the most obvious role for me would be using AI to help us better understand clients, a bit like we do with financial diaries now, all those rich insights that we get. But I think what perhaps could be most exciting is how AI could address one of the biggest barriers to financial inclusion, and that is lack of ID. I think we're all familiar with the stats. 1 in 5 unbanked women globally cite lack of valid ID as a key reason why they don't have an account. Not to mention, I think it's obviously a barrier for refugees and for IDPs. So could AI be helping us to verify client identities, cross-referencing information, matching biometric data, for example? And then going back to the comment on fraud, I think it could be helping FSPs to really address digital identity fraud. That was one of their top priorities. So yes, I think AI is something to watch, even if it's clear from the report, Sam, that we're not just there yet. And I think Opportunity's Chief Technology Officer would say AI is probably less of a damp squib and more of a dry firework. In terms of future priority areas, quickly, I think, yeah, again, as you showed, it's very interesting to see the different responses when you look at the type of respondent. I think what was notable for me was that, funders, support agencies like Opportunity International are rating green finance, financial inclusion of forcibly displaced populations really highly. As Asongo was saying, it's more for FSPs around agri-finance, around food security and nutrition. And of course, these issues are hugely related. And Sam, you already noted that I think what the responses really highlight in the report is your point of view really is determined by your point of viewing. think on the one hand, for organisations like Opportunity, we're seeing that one of the main drivers of forced displacement is a country's inability to feed itself, and that's massively impacted, of course, by climate change. Last year in Malawi, we saw Cyclone Freddy causing huge internal displacement and really devastating the country's food system. And the smallholder farmers that we serve in Malawi are still affected even a year later. And to give you another example from Indonesia, we just surveyed our clients there. 43% of clients are reporting a climate shock in their community in the last 2 years. So yes, it's important. As a sector, are we doing enough? I think probably related to what Asongo was saying, yeah, there's lots of guidance out there. There's lots of materials highlighting what we can be doing to build climate resilience, helping our clients and their communities to feed themselves so that there's less need to migrate. But I think what we're seeing at Opportunity is that a really actual implementation of climate positive policies, of products and services, the implementation is just quite limited. And I think probably that's borne out by some of Asongo's observations particularly around cost. On the other hand, I think it's quite clear from the survey that there's a big group of stakeholders that think that we should be stepping up our efforts to help people who've been displaced, many of whom are completely shut out of the financial system. And I should say I absolutely agree with them. Displacement is really accelerating. We've seen a massive increase in, I think, 50% increase in IDPs just in the last 5 years alone. And climate change has become the leading driver. It's projected, I think, that about 1 billion people will be displaced and join the ranks, if you like, of the climate displaced by 2050 because they're living in countries that are just so vulnerable to ecological threats. I think one of the challenges that the financial inclusion sector is facing is that we see these two critical issues, climate resilience on the one hand and displacement management on the other, as quite separate issues. And I think going forward, we're going to have to see much more integration, breaking down organisational silos. Sam, if I may just briefly on missed opportunities, I think, and what was hinted at, I think, in the survey was around financial inclusion and health. So COVID, it caused this huge, unprecedented health and economic crisis. I think it really opened our collective eyes to insufficient health capacity worldwide. And we know that health costs continue to drive hundreds of millions of people deeper into extreme poverty. I think we can't talk about resilience, which was ranked 3rd overall. We just can't talk about resilience without resilience to idiosyncratic shocks like health emergencies. And I think what's key is that FSPs, who they're serving these remote communities that often go beyond the reach of public health services. So I think for me, for Opportunity, there would be and there is a tremendous underutilized opportunity to leverage this huge distribution platform. And Asongo, you were commenting from an FSP perspective that we need more innovation around products and services. And I would think if we can find more ways to integrate health and financial inclusion with non-financial services, it really could play, probably I think, a significant part in filling gaps in last mile primary healthcare. Thank you, Sam.
I was struck weeks ago reading the responses when they came in that COVID was notable by its absence. And I did a search because I was thinking about doing word clouds, which we've done previous years, and it was barely anywhere, which is surprising considering for the last 3 editions it's been everywhere. And it's almost like there's been a watershed moment where people have put it behind, but it still is the most significant event in the sector of the last several years, and maybe I too was surprised by that. Just on the point of the refugees and FDPs, I can't resist the opportunity to just draw attention to everyone who's here that the current European Microfinance Award 2024 is there. We've just closed round 2 and we're about to be doing those evaluations. Many of you will be aware of the award. The winners will, the semi-finalists and then the 3 finalists will be chosen and then the winner announced at Microfinance Week in November. But it is on this topic, and Deborah's so right. None of us at the e-MFP side were subject experts, but we've talked to a lot of subject experts this year, and the intricate interrelation between these different drivers, and particularly of climate change as the future driver of displacement, cannot be overstated. There are about to welcome Philippe. There's a question from Govinda, which may be well, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A. I don't know if you had a chance to read, Philippe. We could take them after. But one is from Gitane, and it's about which model is more impactful between the Grameen model and self-help groups. This is related to a question that actually came in from Jeffrey Ash earlier, which again said, why does financial inclusion not adequately include ROSCAs, savings groups, and the like? I would argue to that it does. I think that battle has been won, although perhaps there are blind spots. But if you want to have a go at that, or from Govinda's question on differences in customer service and protection between for-profit or not-for-profit MFIs, feel free. Otherwise, Philippe, would you like please give your responses to the survey?
Yeah, I will start by the survey and then by
sure. Good idea.
Yeah, the question. Especially to mention that, I mean, the Grameen Credit Agricole Foundation, I mean, we are not here to work with only people or organizations that are promoting the Grameen model. So we work with very diverse side of institutions, and we mainly, and I would put the hat of the funders, because we mainly provide financial services to our partners. So what I wanted to say very briefly, first of all, is that what I find it quite positive is that, I mean, if you look at the 5 main top trends, which are related to climate, digital, client protection, and so on, I mean, remains quite stable. And I think it's quite key, because I think it's clear that it's something that, I mean, at least at our level in our new strategy, I mean, we put the two main pillars of our strategy is to help our partners in their transformation, because I think here we talk really about transformation, but on their model from going more to digital with the risk, and I'm going to go back to this, of course, and of course how you face climate change. So I think it was good. I think that what I appreciate as well is that in the new trend, I mean, the issues of agri-finance, gender, women empowerment is still part of this, and it's again something that we are very sensitive at the level of the foundation. But where I would definitely like to insist, that where I came as a big surprise, and I think a big question for us, I would say as investors, as funder of the sectors, and I will echo what has been mentioned by Asongo, is the discrepancy between what is the global perception and the perception of the funders, and what is the perception of the FSP. And I think that, I mean, when we talk about innovation in product design, I think that it's clearly, and when I was listening to you, Asongo, I think that I think it should not be only for the FSP. I think it should be for us, I mean, as well. I mean, and I think that also for, I would say, even for Deborah, I mean, we all have to be innovative in the approach and in the program, in the problems that are faced by the FSP, because the FSP, you are the one to have the direct contact with the clientele. You are the one to know more precisely what is happening in the field. And I think that it's clearly, I fully understand that, I mean, the capacity you will have to propose adequate new services to go, for example, we talk a lot about agri-macro insurance. That is a kind of something new, and we know it's not that easy to put in place, but it's a real answer to climate change challenges. So I think that this type of new product, new services, it's all the question how us as a funders, we are able to support you. And you were mentioning, of course, the fact that, for example, there should be this reduction in the interest rate, for example, and that's clearly a good incentive. At the foundation level, very modestly, I would say I think we have been one of the first, if not the first, in the microfinance sectors to start to provide what we call SLL, sustainability linked loan, meaning to say that there are loans that are linked to specific targets, and if you reach those targets, you get a reduction in the pricing of the loan. We have done this on issues related to climate change and on women as well. And I think that we are doing more and more. We were the first one, I think we did it in India, Now we have done it in Bosnia, in Ivory Coast, and that's really something that we want to promote. But that's not the only one. And I think that clearly, and that's a real question as a funder, is that I don't think that you can create or you can bring innovation if you don't finance concretely consultancy missions, if you don't finance TA support and capacity building. And I think it was one of the missed opportunity that was underlined. And I think it's really clear that we do have a responsibility as investors not to look only at the tools that we have in terms of funding, but also to be able to provide this type of non-financial services. And that's, of course, challenging because it's mean that you need to get extra sources of funding, or maybe equity investment could help that because it's a long-term investment. But at the level of the foundation, we do a little bit. It's not our main tool of operation. So I think that at that level, there is still a long way to go. And I think that it really reflects for me when I was reading it, I mean, how we should be ourselves more innovative and how we should be able to bring new type of actors to support capacity building. Because as you mentioned, I mean, and that's really clear, I mean, we've been trying to work with our partners on climate change and so on. If you don't provide training, if you don't provide awareness raising among your clientele, if you don't provide research on what type of new services, what type of new product, if you don't provide this, and this you cannot provide this through loan, you will provide it only through, I would say, some kind of grant subsidies that are helping the FSP to develop these services. It's not that they don't want to do it. It's just that, I mean, of course, if they don't have this type of support, they will not be able to do it. And I'm not surprised on the fraud cases because, for example, at the level of the foundation, this year, one of our partners faced a very big fraud, and it was the largest. I've been working at the foundation for the last 14 years, and it has been the largest fraud we ever seen in the last 14 years. I won't mention where it was, but it was really huge. And I think that, again, here, the issues is really see that, as I said, digital is good. I think that it will definitely help to increase access. The question behind this is not access, is also use, how people are using it, and then, of course, how it helps to make a difference. And that's where, for example, we started to provide technical assistance mission on cybersecurity to really help our partners to set up their own plans and to develop their activities. Another things where I was quite surprised, I mean, which is not new, but I think for me, it's really a question, is related to gender as a top priority for the future. I think it's great, women empowerment and so on. But I really do have a questions. I mean, Mohamed Yunus started by saying we should focus on women empowerment and so on. That was 50 years ago. So how come we are still in this type of top priority? If we would have been kind of efficient, we should have already partly solved the problem. And it should not be a top priority anymore. But it's still one, which is good, of course. And I think it shows the capacity of the sectors to be able to reflect on what they do and how they could do it better than what they have done it. But I think that it really raised the questions of how we should change the paradigm regarding how to deal with women empowerment and gender inequality. I think that we should, again, innovate in the approach. We should be able to be more focused, of course, and to have a better understanding about exactly what is the reality faced by the women in that sector. So I think that there's still a lot of things to do. I think it's good, it's a priority, but it also reflects, whether they say, come on, I mean, after 50 years, how come we are still in that line?
Do you think that last point may be that there's a positive feedback loop, that the more an issue is addressed, the more profile and attention it gets and more research, which therefore highlights the nature of the problem more, so it becomes almost self-perpetuating?
Yeah, I think so, but I think, you know, what struck me really is that, I mean, what I've seen a lot is that, I mean, we serve women for micro activities, micro businesses and so on, but how do we help them to grow up their business? How to help them to to make them more managing bigger businesses and so on. And I think that it's all the question of course, it raised a more global question of what is the place of the women in the society. What do we accept for them? What type of role we want them to have, and so on. And then how we are able to change the cultures behind. And that's, of course, quite a big thing. I know time is short, but I just want to add up two things. One is regarding on displaced person, because we do have at the level of the foundation a very good experience in Uganda. I don't know if our partners will be pre-selected. They have been pre-selected, but I don't know if they will be among the finalists. But anyway, but I think that what always struck me on this is that it's still perceived as, they are still perceived as riskier and as not profitable way of working. And it's not true. I mean, I think I'm very pleased to say that, and I know that Deborah, with Opportunity, you've been working on the subject as well, but at least the concrete experience we have in Uganda, and I hope we will be able to present this at the European Microfinance Week, is that, I mean, no, you can serve refugees or displaced person and be still sustainable, and still is not riskier. Even during the COVID time, I mean, the portfolio at risk of the refugee clientele was much better than the host communities. So I think that there's still this misperception about dealing with this, even though there are, of course, specific issues. That's something that is has to be taken into account. And the last one, which is partly related to displaced person and so on. And I was quite surprised that it didn't really appear, but maybe the question was not maybe raised that way, but it's one of the concern of the as the foundation level, but not only, is what we call now the country risk, meaning to say that we are facing more and more countries in which the risk is linked to unrest, political turmoil, and so on. And that before, you know, we used to analyze mainly our counterpart on the focusing on their own capacity, strength, and weaknesses, and so on. And now I think that we have this global geopolitical unrest or uncertainty and so on that definitely has a much bigger impact. And as an investors, I think that we have to find ways to have a specific approach to be still able to serve. Of course, it doesn't concern all the countries, and maybe it's one of the reasons, like for the refugees, as you mentioned, Sam, regarding a macro approach, but it's still a concern on how we are able to still support in very unstable political countries, people, right, and not to produce more excluded people. And that's yes, sorry.
Sorry, but yes, we must wrap. I was going to ask one last question to each of the three of you, but I'm going to take what you just said as your answer, Philippe. The question was, what would you like to ask the sector, or put another way, what potential question could be added to the paper next year? So a question on country risk, or a framing of that, I'll take. Deborah and Asongo. Deborah first. What would you like to know from the sector that if you could ask it?
Thanks, Sam. Well, I think there have been some comments and questions as well around savings, and we're right to highlight savings in terms of resilience, ability to build up assets and so on. Lots of work in Africa, particularly around that. But I'd argue that a lot of the focus on the sector is around looking at the business case for the financial service providers. Lots of work in terms of linkages with informal savings groups. So I'd love to know a bit more about teasing out, are these savings accounts being designed specifically with the commercial needs of FSPs, or are we designing these accounts with the needs of low-income savers? So I think that would be something for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And Asongo? Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me, but is there any question you would like to know, to have in the 2025 Compass?
Yeah, thank you. I would love to probably to find out, you know, has financial inclusion being able to make clients build economic resilience, or is rather adding to their financial burdens? That we need to know, because sometimes we tend to forget about the customer satisfaction of what we're doing. And when you throw that, maybe you'll be surprised to see some of the responses that will come from different sectors. is this really making an impact? Then there are some of the questions true, like on the trends, non-financial services. It will be good to unbundle that in the 2025 survey, maybe include health awareness, financial literacy, education, vocational training. That will give more meaning and clarity to the respondents to be able to make a choice. And maybe the last, there was a question on impact measurement. I think if you unbundle that to talk about client satisfaction, it will be good, and we'll be able to make more meaning from the response that we're going to get. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks to the three of you for joining for this and for reading the paper to prepare for it so well. Thanks to all the respondents who did reply to the survey. My colleague Daniel has posted in the chat the link to the news item that has the paper and also the executive summaries in Spanish and French. Please do repost it, disseminate in any way you wish. We'd appreciate that. And thanks to FinDev as well. I'm going to hand back to Abby now, and thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sam, and to the panelists and all the participants for such an engaging discussion. Before we close, I just wanted to go over quickly what's next. We'd love to hear from you. To get your feedback. When you close your Zoom window, a brief survey will appear, and we'd really appreciate if you can take a brief moment to respond to those questions. Second, as I mentioned in the beginning, the recording from this webinar and the presentations will be shared on FinDev Gateway website after the webinar, and we'll also send a follow-up email with the recording and the presentation, and you can feel free to share it with your network. And lastly, of course, for more financial inclusion resources, please visit findevgateway.org and e-MFP.eu. And once again, a big thank you to the panelists and to all of you who joined the webinar today for your questions and engagement on the topic. Thank you, and have a good day or evening wherever you are.